Hey folks, welcome to another Passion for Sound audio review, and today we're taking a look at the Erzetich Thalia headphones. These are a bit of an unusual headphone for the market because they're a portable, open-back on-ear headphone. We don't see a lot of on-ear headphones these days. We also don't see a lot of on-ear headphones, meaning that the pads actually sit on the ear rather than around the ear, and I was really interested to take a listen to these and see how well they could perform. The Thalias retail for €599, which is about $640 US. And so at that price, they're a fairly expensive headphone for a compact on-ear headphone, but if they perform well, it might be worth it. The Thalias use a 40mm dynamic driver on each side, and these are using a titanium-coated dynamic driver, which theoretically should make them light and stiff and therefore very responsive. They're a 32 ohm headphone, but there's no sensitivity figure quoted, which means that I don't know exactly how easy they are to drive. But in my experience, they run beautifully from dongles, from compact portable devices, and of course desktop devices, so they're going to definitely work for any portable device. And indeed, on the Erzetich website, it talks about the fact that these have been tuned specifically for portable use. So that means making them both easy to run from small, less powerful devices, but also their tuning, their frequency response, has been optimized for portable use. And what that generally means is you're going to get a bit more bass out of them to offset any background ambient noise. And indeed, as we'll talk about shortly, they are a slightly kind of warmer and richer sounding headphones, but done in a really good way. But we'll get to that in just a moment. The other things to talk about before we get there is the design of the headphones themselves and also the accessories. What you get in the box with the Thalias is you get this cable here. It's a silver-plated cable. It's a nice lightweight cable. It's terminated in 3.5mm connectors going into the headphones and also a 3.5mm connector going into your device. So very much a portable style cable, very lightweight, very comfortable, and also 3.5mm terminated. When I reached out to Erzetich about the cable to ask if it's available in a balanced option, they said it can be ordered balanced if you want it. So this one came with 3.5, but it doesn't mean you can't get balanced as I understand it. The other thing that was in the box is a CD, which is kind of cool. So what you get is a bunch of different test tracks selected by Erzetich to actually try out your new headphones. And I think that's really cool. I don't know if this comes with all of their different products, but I liked the fact that they're providing you some music to test out on the headphones. And certainly from what I've heard of these, the recordings are good quality. So it could be a reference disc for some of you if you want those tracks, if you like the music, and it's a nice little touch. Moving on to the design of the headphones now, and I really like their octagonal design. It's very unique, very different. These are actually made out of wood that's then been kind of painted and weathered to make it look a bit old and stressed. Other than the wood cups, you've then got metal fittings everywhere, other than the pads of course. Everything else is metal. And generally speaking, they feel very long lasting and hard wearing. Having said that though, I do have a couple of minor gripes. One of them is that they don't really get any smaller than this. You can twist the cups this way so they'll sit flat and they'll go in a bag very flat, but you can't fold them up in any way. So they're not the most overall compact headphone around, but going flat and being very sturdy means I'd be comfortable chucking them in a bag, assuming you can slide them in somewhere. The one other gripe I have with the design is the fact that I do find they get a bit uncomfortable after a while. And that's purely because they're an on-ear, not an over-ear. That's giving you a nice compact size, but it does mean that after a while, you're going to feel the pressure of the pads on the ear, and there's really no way around that. I think Erzetich have done as good a job as you can at making these as comfortable as they could be, but there's still an on-ear design, and that's always going to be a little bit of a problem for extended usage. So I find after about 45 minutes, these start to get uncomfortable, and I tend to want to take them off for 5-10 minutes before I keep going. That might be long enough for you. You might find that you're only ever listening to these for sort of 30 to 40 minutes at a time, but do keep it in mind. As for the padding and the general approach to comfort, the pads are comfortable, the top padding on the headband is comfortable so you don't get hot spots. Everything's been done to make them as good as possible. As I said, it's just the fact that they're on ear is the problem. Before I put the headphones down, two other things to mention. I've already touched on this once. You've got 3.5mm sockets on the bottom of these. You can run them balanced, as I've already said. And then the final thing to talk about is the adjustment mechanism. So these are a screw adjustment, which means that you do have to actually manually unscrew them, slide, and then re-screw them up. But it's been done in a way that you can just loosen it a little bit and give yourself very fine control where you have to push fairly hard to adjust it, and then you can tighten it again. So what that means is that the first time you get these set up, it's a little bit fiddly, but the good news is they're going to hold their shape, they're going to hold the position you put them in, regardless of how much you're bumping them around in a bag. If you're someone that regularly adjusts, if you're sharing them with other people, it might be a bit of a hassle. But I think for what they're designed for, as in to go in a bag, be portable, get knocked around potentially, I think that's a really good design to keep things set up exactly how you like them. And so having covered off all of that, I would say that they're a good comfort headphone for what they are, being an on-ear. They're not the best comfort headphone when compared to over-ear portable headphones. They're also not as compact as I might have liked to see them. But if you want something a bit different, if you like the look and the style, and you like what I'm about to say about the sound quality, they're definitely not a bad headphone in any way, shape or form. They're just not the most comfortable for long listening sessions. So let's start talking now about the sound and see if you like what I have to say. Trying to work out what gear you should buy next? Have a look at the Passion for Sound Recommends link down in the description below. Clicking on the link will take you through to my Patreon page, and specifically a post where you can click on the Airtable image to go through to my recommended product database. Once you're in the database, you can use the filter button up the top to choose which sorts of product types you want to have a look at, maybe headphones, maybe DACs, maybe amps. Choose the one or ones that you want to see from this list, and then you can also sort the list by price if you want to, or other features as well. You'll then see a consolidated list just of the product types you want to have a look at, including things like what the retail price was when I last checked. You've got links to my reviews of each product, and then also links to where you can go and buy them. Feel free to play around with the filters and sorting options as much as you like to find the gear you're looking for, and I hope that this database points you in just the right direction for you. So happy hunting, happy listening, and now let's get back to the review. Moving through my normal range of testing for these, the first thing I noticed was the treble on these. And that is that it's extended, it's clean, it's refined, it's not overly smoothed off, but it's also not too bitey. It manages to straddle the line between not being aggressive, but not being soft, not being mushy or overly rolled off. What that means is that some people might want a bit more energy or attack from the sound, but I found that to be just about right, particularly in a portable situation where you're probably going to be turning up the volume a little bit more. You're going to want a bit more bass emphasis, a bit more richness and warmth through the mids, and so you don't want too much treble because you're trying to offset ambient noise. One thing that treble performance translates to is that they're not the most kind of tangible in terms of the transients. I love a headphone where you can kind of feel the energy of the music, and I don't just mean bass punch, I mean feeling the crispness of notes. And these don't tend to do that so much, and that's largely because of the treble that I just spoke about. So you're not going to feel the energy of things like guitar strums, drum hits, things like that. But at the same time, they're not a boring listen. I want to make that really clear. They've got enough energy overall in the sound that they're engaging, they're fun, I like them, but they just don't give you that sense of feeling the tactile nature of those crisp moments, those transient moments in the music. Moving into the mid-range and the vocal area, what I found from these is that they're rich, they're kind of full-bodied, they're not overly thick, but they don't also give you too much texture. So for those that like to hear a lot of air, a lot of texture in the voice, these probably aren't going to be the best choice. But again, I can't stress enough that I think there's a really fine line that's being balanced beautifully by the Thalias, and that is that they're giving you a sense of richness and full bodiness in the mid-range without getting too thick, without getting too warm. It just means they're not super textured. If you're a big fan of the Harman curve and its emphasis on the upper mid-range, these aren't going to be a great choice. But if you're more like me and you're just a fan of great sounding music, I do think they sound brilliant. What that richness and fullness in the mids means is that they're a mid-range forward type of sound. They're not pushy or shouty, but they're going to bring the mid-range forward and present into all your music. So for vocal lovers, for people that love sounds like, say, an HD6XX, these are a great option. They've got that same sense of mid-range quality, focus and emphasis without overbalancing the frequency response. They're not all about mids, they're not only about mids, they've still got energy and dynamics and clarity, but they're definitely, in my opinion, a vocal lover's headphone. As we move down into the bass, the Thalias have a surprising amount of bass for an open back portable, and a compact one at that. They've got a good sense of presence, they do have some rumble, they don't extend all the way down, they don't go super deep, but they've got a really good sense of bass when you need it, for most genres. If you are into things like electronic music where there's bass going all the way down to 20 Hz or below, they might start to disappoint at the very bottom ends. But for any music produced by acoustic or electrified acoustic instruments, they're going to cover almost the entire frequency range fairly linearly. There is a bit of roll-off at the end that is going to start to just taper off the very bottom notes of, say, a double bass. but it's only really enough that it's noticeable if you're directly comparing to something that you know has linear bass, or if you know the track really, really well from headphones that extend all the way to 20 Hz. If you just pick these up and put them on, you would never ever know there's anything missing. And indeed, I wouldn't even say it's missing, it's just tapered off slightly. One thing to take note of is that because their bass is fairly linear, meaning it doesn't have a lot of lumps and bumps, they're not an overly punchy sounding headphone. If you've listened to something like a Focal headphone, even some of the ZMF headphones, a lot of those are tuned with a little bit of a bump in the bass, and that can bring an extra sense of punch to the sound that these don't have because they're quite flat in the bass. It doesn't mean the bass isn't there, it doesn't mean it's not present, and indeed if the recording has a very punchy, thumpy bass line, these will show it to you, but they're not going to enhance the bass, they're not going to make it extra punchy if that makes sense. And so how I describe the overall bass from the Thalias is it's solid, it's tangible, it's present, it's well balanced and it's well tuned. And that's true across the entire frequency range. I think overall I'd describe these as being a fairly neutral headphone with a slightly warm tilt, and I'd definitely say that I think overall they're going to be very enjoyable for most people, and particularly knowing that they're designed for mobile use. That extra bit of warmth and richness is absolutely going to balance off background noise, which tends to come in at those lower frequencies. And so you're going to be able to get a really nice sound that's quite neutral and quite balanced when offset against that background noise. So I think the tuning of these is great in terms of frequency response. But let's talk now about technicalities, because sometimes a really nicely tonally balanced headphone isn't the best technically, so let's check that out. Starting off with resolution, and these are a surprisingly resolving headphone for a richer, warmer sound. They're not super textured or enhanced, as I said before, but they do provide a lovely sense of detail within their warmth and richness. And remembering it's just a slight warmth and richness, they're overall pretty balanced, but just tilting a little bit into warmth. Their staging is fairly compact, but nicely spaced out. And what I mean by that is they don't throw a huge soundstage. They don't give you a sense of this massive expanse around you, but within the space that they have, they separate things nicely. There's a decent sense of width. There's actually a decent sense of depth. It's not huge, but it's enough that things never sound like they're all falling on top of one another. And I think that's pretty impressive for an on-ear compact headphone like this. They're not going to beat another $500 or $600 full-size desktop-style headphone, but for what they are, I think they're pretty impressive. The clarity of imaging and where you can place the sounds in the mix is very strong from these. I don't think they're quite on the level of more expensive headphones, and maybe not even on the level of equally priced full-size desktop-style headphones, but for what they are and what they offer, I think it's excellent. You can clearly place where sounds are coming from, there's a good sense of space and separation between those sounds, and it's really just for me that kind of the edges of the sounds, the exact kind of laser-sharp focus of sounds isn't quite where it could be on a more expensive headphone, but again we're talking about a compact on-ear portable, and for that I think they're excellent. For those of you that are fans of classical music, they handle classical music quite well. It's delivered in a very smooth way, so do have a think about what you value in classical music. If you like a lot of texture, a lot of detail, then you're going to want to go elsewhere away from the Thalias. But if you actually just want the experience of listening to your classical music delivered in a rich and smooth way, they do a lovely job. They've got enough detail and texture that it never sounds muddy or thick or kind of smooshed all together. It's just that they don't bring out a lot of the texture. I think their tonal balance and their sense of space that they deliver is just fine for classical music. It's quite enjoyable. And so it's really going to come down to your personal tastes, whether you're a textural person and you love hearing all the bite of the strings and the kind of that raspiness of brass, for instance. These aren't going to enhance any of that. They're not going to completely smooth it off, but they're sitting in that space where it is a little bit rich, it is a little bit smooth, and so it depends on your tastes. In terms of their ability to groove or rock, I find once again, and I'm sorry to keep saying this, but I think it's really important to highlight, for a compact portable on-ear headphone, they're doing a great job. And that is to say that they don't have the bass presence and punch to get really super engaging, but their smoother, slightly richer tonality means that they're able to give you that really full-bodied sound. They bring enough bass presence to get into the music, to give you a sense of the rhythm of the music, and without going to a full-size desktop headphone, they're going to be pretty hard to beat. Their smoother tonality means that if you do want to turn it up a bit to get that extra sense of energy, you can absolutely do that. And that comes back to what I said before, that you're probably going to want to turn these up a bit more if you're out and about with them. And so I think tonally and technically, the Thalias are about as good as I've heard for the price and the style of headphone. I wouldn't recommend these necessarily over a full-sized headphone, like a desktop-style headphone at a similar price. If you're looking at things like an Ananda Stealth, maybe you're looking at a Harmonic Dyne G200, or even the new Sennheiser HD660S2, which I've got here for review, so make sure you stay tuned for that one. If you're looking at those sorts of comparisons, the full-size headphones are going to win. They've got bigger drivers, they're more comfortable, they're letting your ear be fully involved, and what I mean by that is the outer ear has some acoustic properties as well, so they're letting that whole process occur with the outer ear and the inner ear, whereas the Thalias are kind of piping directly into the ear, a little bit more like an IEM, not quite, but a bit more like that. And so the Thalias are never going to beat a full-sized headphone, but for what they're offering, at the price they're offering, in the form factor, I think they're really excellent. Unfortunately, I don't really have anything comparable to these. I'm not going to compare them here to the full-sized open-back headphones because there's just no point. But what I will do instead is run through 3 tracks that you can listen to for yourself on whatever headphones you're familiar with and get a better sense of exactly how the Thalias sound. The first track I took notes on was 99 Problems by Jay-Z and Danger Mouse. This is from the Grey album. And the Thalias have a fantastic tonality for this type of mix, both in terms of the genre but also just the way the album's put together. The sound is solid and rich. The vocals are really clear, really easy to engage with. Because they're slightly smoother treble, there's no issues with some of the samples being a bit grainy and a bit noisy. And whilst I wouldn't exactly call what I was hearing hi-fi, that's not really what the track is about, and I don't believe it's because the Thalias are actually muddying up the track so much as they're not trying to over-enhance anything. They're not trying to take a track like that and make it sound hi-fi. They're just taking a track like this, delivering it fairly honestly with just a little dash of extra warmth. Moving on to something different, and the next track I had was I Want You to Want Me by Cheap Trick live at Budokan. And being that this is a live recording, the first thing I was aware of was a sense of space that the Thalias gave me in the live venue recording. And that is to say that I could tell it was a live venue, I could tell there was lots of space, but it was still delivered in a fairly compact overall soundstage. Once again, the vocals were very available, very present, accessible from the Thalias. And I liked how they balanced the percussion, the guitar, the bass, and everything that was backing the vocals. It was all well balanced. Nothing stood out, nothing jumped forward. It was just all presented in a very even way. As I listened more, I felt like maybe just a little bit more bite from the guitars would have been good. And that's what I was saying before, where sometimes the slightly smoother treble from these will leave some people wanting just that bit more energy, that bit more attack, but it's also going to come down to the recording. And so with that in mind, let me jump to a different recording now for a bit of a contrast. And on this occasion, the track is A Cheat by Blue Hawaiians. And the reason I raised this was that on this track, I was getting a bit too much bite from the Thalias. And that's not a reflection of the Thalias. It's not to say they're inconsistent. My point is that they are a fairly refined and smooth headphone, and what that means is they're going to smooth off some tracks if the track doesn't have a lot of bite in the recording, but it doesn't mean that they're completely smoothing off. So on a track like this being A Cheat, on a track like A Cheat where it has got quite hot treble, they're still showing you that. And I wanted to draw out that contrast to say that these are not mushy headphones. They're not rolling off all the treble. They're just giving you a slightly warmer tilt from neutral, but they're still neutral enough that you're going to hear recordings that are a bit hot. The overall experience of listening to A Cheat was that I was hearing a nice clean sound. The quite clarity-focused recording of this track balanced off well with the smoothness of the Thalias. And what I was hearing was overall very clean and quite crisp. It would have been nice to hear just a bit more depth in the soundstage on this track, but the separation of sounds and the ability for them not to all be on top of one another was still pretty good. The vocals on this track were right up close to me, not in the sense that they were becoming kind of claustrophobic or in my face, but it was like the singer was right there in front of me. It was almost kind of solid and tangible, and it was a really lovely experience. As I've already mentioned, there was at times a little bit too much bite from the Thalias, and that was coming from things like the percussion on these. So sounds like a snare or a cymbal, and even some of the sibilant sounds from the vocalist, those were just getting a little bit aggressive. And as a test, I went over to the Moondrop Venus that I'm also preparing a review for, and listening to the same track on the Venus showed that it's a very crispy track. So on something like the Venus, that became too much. It was harder to listen to because of their tuning. And I draw that out because I just wanted to clarify that the Thalias, as I said before, are a little bit warm. They do tilt away from neutral towards warmth. But this track shows that they're not completely smoothing things off. They're not muddying things up. And so after doing a bunch of testing with these, I'm pretty impressed. If they were just a little bit more comfortable, I could see them being a go-to for extended listening sessions for me. But as it is for me, they kind of have a 45-minute listening limit for me because of the pad design, the on-ear design, etc. Having said that, each of those 45-minute sessions is going to be filled with great musical enjoyment. And so I'd say that if you're in the market for a portable open-back headphone and you're looking for something compact, you're happy with the form factor here, then these are definitely a headphone worth considering. I also found they respond quite nicely to trying some different cables. I used a copper Litz cable on these and I preferred it from the silver-plated copper cable that comes with them. But that's something that you can work out for yourself because 3.5mm connection cables are really easy to get your hands on. And so if this headphone sounds interesting to you, if you like the sound of what I've described, and you're happy with a headphone that's on ear and therefore is inevitably going to be less comfortable than an over-ear headphone, if that's interesting to you, I'll put some links down below where you can go through and buy direct from Erzetich. There's no affiliates here or anything like that. It's just a case where I've heard a headphone that I think's really nice. As I said, it's not beating out or competing directly with full-size desktop over-ear headphones, but for portable and compact use, I think it's great. And for the tuning style as well, there's not a lot on the market that sounds quite like these, and in that regard, I think they're fantastic. So check out the link below if you're interested. As always, I hope you found the review useful and helpful, and if you have, I'd love it if you hit the like button and consider subscribing and ringing the notification bell if you haven't already. But for now, let me leave it to the music, so happy listening, and I'll see you next time on Passion for Sound.